Joburg is a diverse tapestry. Those who come to this city either love or hate the rat race. But many say what is most appealing about Johannesburg is its people. So I would argue Helen Zille, the DA's mayoral candidate for the city of Johannesburg, perhaps belongs here. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Hajra.
Have you moved to Joburg yet?
Yes, I have. I'm living here. I've been living here since early January.
When do we expect to see you in the council as a councillor?
That's a good question, Hajra. At the moment, I have two jobs. I am the chair of the Federal Council of the Democratic Alliance, which is equivalent to the Secretary General. And that comes with quite a big workload, which I have to see to. And I'm often up very late at night doing those jobs. And then I am part of a big mayoral campaign, which keeps me busy every single day. I don't want a third job. I don't want to now be in council, and you can't go there and coast and be a passenger on a train. There's a lot of work to do, and I would be allocated a constituency or a ward or 2 wards or 3 wards, and I would have thick agendas and documents to read. And frankly, I would like to run a campaign to give every person who lives in Joburg and every voter our offer to allow them to make an informed choice come the election.
I put this question to the Joburg Mayor, Dada Morawa. What has happened to the Joburg we knew? Service delivery in this province has collapsed under DA-led governments and ANC-led governments. So is it not important for you to go to council to understand how much of council meetings today are dominated by votes of no confidence?
Well, I can see that from outside. I don't have to be in the council to know about votes of no confidence. I mean, in my capacity as Secretary General of the DA, we run a governance unit that reports to me. And I see motions of no confidence every day, everywhere. I mean, I've just been dealing with a situation in Oudtshoorn, then there is the situation in Saldanha, then there is the situation in Ekurhuleni, and all over the place. We deal with them all the time. And I can see how unstable the government is. Revolving door at the mayor's office when you get people who have voted for all these tiny parties wanting to switch sides and vote mayors out all the time.
Why should we consider you a Joburger?
Well, firstly, I was born here. I was born in Hillbrow, and I was raised here. I went to school here. I went to university here, and I got my first few jobs here. I only went to Cape Town because I married a Cape Townian. So I sometimes call myself a romantic refugee, otherwise I would have never left Joburg. But I think it's time to come home. It's time to come home to the city that I really love, that I feel is home. I mean, I've slotted right back into the spirit, to the gees, to the people, to the life. It's sad to see what's happened, but everyone who loves Joburg, and almost everyone here loves Joburg, and believes that Joburg has a future, is going to work together to fix the city, and we know we can.
What is your vision for the city of Joburg?
Well, my vision for the city of Joburg is a city, an inclusive city for all, in which very reliable and functional services are delivered by an excellent government that cares about all the people.
When you took over as mayor of the city of Cape Town, I would say it was not as bad in terms of the service delivery collapse in Johannesburg. What can you promise in the short term?
Right, you are quite correct that when we took over Cape Town from the ANC hadn't been in power as long as they have been in Joburg, and it was much easier to turn around. It was deteriorating rapidly, but it wasn't as low as Joburg is on the spiral. If we take over Joburg, firstly, you can be sure that we will do whatever it takes to end the syndicated corruption. And that will do a lot towards fixing and stabilizing Joburg's finances, which you heard the Minister of Finance talk about in his budget speech recently, in which he particularly singled out Joburg for being in financial crisis and not spending enough money by a very long shot on maintaining its infrastructure, especially water. So the first thing people can expect is that we will stop corruption. It'll take time and it'll be dangerous, but we will. And then we will ring fence the money that comes in for water, that comes in for electricity, that comes in for all the other trading services. We will ring fence the money for those services so that we can maintain the infrastructure that deliver those services, that's water and electricity and other things, and that can fix what is broken and plan for the future and invest in new infrastructure. That's what we will do.
Let's deal with them step by step.
Okay.
Johannesburg paid the price for state capture. We were burdened with 12 hours of load shedding when it was at its peak a day for months and months on end. What can you do as a executive mayor in a metro to ensure we have less reliance on Eskom?
Well, most cities don't have total reliance on Eskom anymore because they deal with independent power producers. And I'm all in favour of that. And when I was the Premier of the Western Cape, working together with the municipalities there, we got a whole regulatory regime in place to enable wheeling to happen, which is large-scale independent generation, then shared with other users of electricity. And now in Cape Town, anybody who generates electricity on their rooftop can use what they need and sell what they don't need back into the grid. And that amount of money is calculated as a deduction from their other service charges. So it's a fantastic system, and I would love to introduce that in Joburg as well, so people can generate electricity and sell surplus back. And so that in that way you become less and less dependent on Eskom. And as green energies advance technologically, there are extraordinary ways to generate far more electricity out of natural resources like the sun, like the wind, and now geothermal energy is becoming a thing, that you use the Earth's own internal heat to generate electricity, which is extraordinary. So that's the way we have to go. And if many people who can afford sun panels, because many people can't afford them, but if all those who can afford them do, and then pump electricity back into the grid and then get paid for it, but at a lower rate than we would pay Eskom, then we can bring down prices for the poor. The worst thing of all would be to have the poor staying on Eskom, the rich abandoning Eskom, and then you have a situation where the poor are paying repayments for Vadupi, Kusile, and all the corruption that went on under the years of state capture, and the wealthy are bringing down their cost of electricity because of the advancement in technology. That would be terrible. So we have to maintain a cross-subsidizing system that advantages the poor.
Under the vision you've just painted, Eskom would struggle to survive. Do you think it's at the end of the road for the state power utility?
I do think that Eskom is in a death spiral. It has been slightly delayed, and it has been enormously helped to survive by all the independent power producers that are pumping electricity into the grid. There is still a grid that has to be maintained. So I think Eskom will always have a role if it unbundles and creates a distribution companies. There will always be a role for a state entity to run a functional grid. And transmission is done by local authorities. So there is a role for Eskom, but there's no need for Eskom to monopolize generation at all. And there may not even be the need for Eskom to monopolize distribution, but definitely not generation. And the critical thing is, as we move off the monopoly of Eskom in generation, to make sure you have systems in which the poor don't suffer.
Well, that signals a major change in terms of the way the energy monopoly of the country would be run going forward. Let's talk about water. You said something in a recent sit-down we had that the national government were being fed the wrong information. Now, we know there's kilometers and kilometers of piping and infrastructure that needs to be repaired that has not. We know that some communities in Johannesburg have gone without water, sitting on over 40 days now.
Some 8 months.
8 months.
8 months. In Selby, 8 months.
What would you do as executive mayor?
Well, the water crisis has been a long time coming, and some of it has been neglect, and some of it has been deliberate. Because you can make a lot of money from water tankers, and the city of Joburg has just bought a new fleet of water tankers. For what reason, I don't know, when they should actually be spending money on fixing what is broken and on maintaining the crumbling system. So that shows you where the priority lies. And I think in many cases, for example, in one case, the famous case where a valve was turned off and there was no water so that the water tankers could come in, one of our councillors, Nicole van Dijk, discovered that the valve was turned off and switched it on and there was the water. That could only have been deliberate. So it's a combination of deliberate and neglect. Now, the city of Joburg spends 0.5% on maintenance when the Treasury standard should be 8% of the value of capital assets. It's 0.5%. And that is why you have the mess that you have. And the Treasury did a deep dive into Joburg, and the Treasury has got the right information and knows what's going on. And it is parlous, which is why the Minister of Finance particularly singled out Joburg in his budget speech to show how disastrous it is. So what we will have to ring-fence the money that comes in for water and use it for maintenance. Now, to give you an example, Cape Town replaces about 140 kilometers of pipe every year. And if you do that as general maintenance every single year, you won't end up with a water crisis unless it doesn't rain for 7 years, as it did when, and even now we've prepared for that. So you won't have a crisis because the pipes can't cope. In Joburg last year, in the middle of this crisis, they replaced 17 kilometers of pipe. Wow. Now that is the level of the crisis you're talking about. 4 water systems in Joburg are on their last legs. One is Hursthill, those 2 reservoirs that are completely on bypass and that can never get the pressure they need then for a gravity-fed system. The second is South Hills. Then there is the whole Alexandra Berea system, which is in a terrible condition. And the next is Midrand. And what you have to do if you've got to keep providing water to people is make sure that 4 major systems serving hundreds of thousands of people don't finally collapse. I mean, sections have finally collapsed. For example, here in Selby, not too far from where we are now, people have been without water for 8.5 months. And factories have to close and people lose their jobs. It is a terrible situation.
I must mention that if you read Business Day, Natasha Marion gave the same outlook that the Treasury gave this year about 2 years ago in our paper. Zille Brink, who is the executive mayor of the city of Tshwane, when he was in office, he banned water tankers. Would you go to such extreme, given that we've only spent dealt with 1.7 meters of pipe?
No, 17 meters of pipe.
Meters.
But look, in some instances, people are going to need those water tankers because they can't get water any other way. But I would ban the corruption that goes into the procurement of water tankers. Water tankers in Joburg are going to be with us for some time because it's a first responsibility of local government to see that people's basic human rights are met, and water is an unconditional right. So if you can't get water to people any other way, you're going to have to get it to them through water tankers. What we have to start doing is removing the incentive, because there's a huge incentive to have to rely on water tankers, and that's the incentive of corruption. And if you remove that incentive, then you're in a situation where people won't show as much interest as they currently are in getting water tankers around.
How do you close the tap on corruption when other ministers, other premiers, other mayors have tried, but they have hit a brick wall in terms of firing those who are corrupt in their ranks? We get people suspended for months. We get whistleblowers, auditors in particular, facing looking down the barrel in Gauteng these days. How do you stop corruption?
Well, I would like to do a major forensic audit on all contracts above a certain value. And already some retired forensic auditors and others have come to me and said, we'll be at your service. We'll do anything to help make Joburg work. And that's the Joburg spirit. And I would accept those. And I would say these are the 40 major contracts that we need a proper forensic audit on. Then in the procurement system, which is terribly rigged at the moment, you have to look at the bid evaluation process and you have to look at the bid adjudication process, which are two separate steps supposed to be. I've been asking whether in law I'm allowed to bring independent experts of a significant number into those bidding processes to be the watchdogs against corruption. Now, I could never get involved because you're not allowed to, as a politician, get involved for very good reason. So I would never be involved and nor any councillors. But I want to know if experts, if auditors, if accountants, if engineers, if experts in the field could be there on the bid evaluation committee and then finally on the bid adjudication committee. I would ban all pre-qualifying conditions that enable people to be excluded from the bidding process before they've even put in a bid, because that's another way that corruption happens. And I would certainly set up a very modern system for reporting corruption on an app in which the person who's reporting it can't be traced at all. And in that way, I hope to make it so difficult to commit corruption and so expensive to commit corruption that people say it's over now. Another big way to do it is to open up these committees, especially the bid evaluate. You open it up to public scrutiny. Anyone can come and sit there and look and watch you manipulate. And that helps to stop it.
Are you not afraid? Because in the Madlanga Commission, we've heard testimony of the police in Gauteng being the most corrupt amongst us. We've also heard testimony that the police are run by crime syndicates and are not working in the national interest. Even police going to the extent of allegations of police killing someone and calling in the cooks to bury the body. Are you not afraid in going up against that?
Look, of course there's a risk, there's a risk. I'd be I'd be naive to think there isn't a risk. There is, of course. But if Joburg and South Africa are going to be saved, there's got to be some people who are prepared to take that risk. And when you're my age, you've lived a life. You can take those kinds of risks. You can go ahead and do the things that you probably wouldn't dare to do if you had small children. So you can take those risks. And it's not only the police, it's the prosecuting authority in South Gauteng. Andrew Chauke is notorious, for example. And if you read the book on Babito Deokaran by Jeff Wicks, The Shadow State, you'll see just how bad it is and how useless the investigation deliberately was into Babito Deokaran's assassination, which points to some kind of collusion between the police and the criminals. So yes, it is going to be unbelievably difficult. But if Cyril Ramaphosa follows through with basically getting all senior appointments in the police service reaccredited and excluded if there's any taint on their name, well, so be it. There are a lot of people who are going to have to do a lot of things that are risky and dangerous if we want to prevent South Africa from becoming a mafia state. And we're well on the way to becoming a mafia state when you listen to the Madlanga Commission. The criminals get into government or they control people in government. The criminals control the police or they actually become the police. And once the criminals are in government and in cahoots with the criminals in the criminal justice system, then you can't ever talk about having a democracy or a constitution that works.
I can't just talk to you about the issue of transformation and economic redress. Johannesburg is very different to Cape Town. The majority in this city are black. Will that be reflected should you be elected and have to appoint a mayoral executive committee?
I firmly believe that you choose people who can do the job. Because no one in Soweto where they haven't got water, and no one in Westbury where they haven't got water, is saying, was the water engineer black or white who built the system? They're not saying that. They're saying, we demand water, right? Now, anybody who asks me whether I will pick people on the basis of a racial numbers game must have an inherent sense that black people can't make it on merit. Of course, black people can make it on merit.
So
there are a large number of meritorious black people who, given an opportunity, will be great. How do you think we've got 2 black cabinet ministers who came through our Young Leaders program? So I don't make the assumption that if you want merit, you can't have diversity. Of course you can have diversity.
Will your executive be majority white male?
I have no idea. I first got to get elected.
Okay.
I first got to get elected, and then I've got to look at the portfolios, and I've got to understand the crisis in each portfolio, and then I have to look at which person's CV and experience can best be used to give political leadership to address that crisis. That is what you do in government. Otherwise, you end up with places that are scored as the worst municipalities all the time, places like Mfuleni. We've got excellent people of all races in our caucuses. We spend a lot of time hunting for them. For 20 years now, every year we've run a Young Leaders program. So truly, we've got excellent people of all races coming through, and the DA is the one place where we search for young talent and give young talent opportunities.
I've asked and I've been answered. If you were elected executive mayor in the city of Johannesburg, do you intend to stick around for 1 term, which is 5 years, or 2 terms, which is 10?
Again, I don't know. I mean, at the moment, I've got as much energy as I had when I was 25. But you never know what goes. I might be run over by a bus.
How do you have as much energy as when you were 25?
Well, I was born with it. I mean, my poor mother, I didn't sleep for the first, I don't know how long of my life. And my poor mother was absolutely flattened by me. And I also wasn't a very easy teenager, I have to be honest. But I've always had this incredible amount of energy. I don't need much sleep, and I love the job, and I need a purpose, and there's no greater purpose than Joburg and South Africa.
In electoral trends that we've seen in recent years, the electorate seem to be losing confidence in party politics. How do you think politics needs to reshape itself to win over the confidence of the electorate? Because voter turnout in this election is a major issue.
Well, people have lost faith in politics because the way they have voted has resulted in dysfunctional governments. Let me be very frank. The people who say to me, oh, you can never blame the voters. And I say, listen, voters get the government they voted for. Now, if people want good government, and if they want their city to improve, like every single place under the DA, unless we are sitting in a coalition that is dependent on the EFF. That's why Joburg couldn't function in our last 2 coalitions here, because both mayors were dependent on the EFF, and we saw what happened there. So if people give us enough votes to get blue government, you'll get the kind of government that you've got on the top 10 municipalities in South Africa. That's what you'll get. But if
5 years?
Not in 5 years. Not in 5 years. In 5 years, we'll get reliable water and electricity. We will fix the roads. We will ensure that we do everything possible to bring back investment into the city. We will make sure that we do everything possible to make public spaces safe and usable by everyone and fix the small business nodes. That's what we'll do. But it takes a long time. I mean, Cape Town has been under the DA for 20 years. And that is why in the last quarterly labour force survey, they went up by 49,000 jobs in that quarter, and Joburg went down by almost the same amount.
In the 2021 general elections, or after that, you criticised IEC's integrity, saying that they were bought by the ANC, were working for the ANC. Do you still believe that?
Well, in 2021, I was overseeing the election in Nelson Mandela Bay. And I was going around the different voting stations. And I saw where the ANC has a stronghold of votes. The IEC had various voter management devices, and they divided the queue into different sections of surname, alphabetical surname, and they processed people quickly. In the DA strongholds, 1 voter management device. 1. And the queue stretching right around a school. And then I would go up and because I had all the accreditation to be in all the voting stations, and I had my proper accreditation garb on the badge and all of that. I went in and I stood there and I timed how long they were taking to process each voter on the voter management devices as those voters came in. They took 1.5 minutes per voter. And then I calculated how long it would take. And I said, this is ridiculous. People are going to go home. It was a windy day. And if you want to know windy, Cape Town hasn't got a patch on Port Elizabeth for wind. Gqeberha for wind. So it was terrible. And people were standing there with their babies on their backs and all of that at the Ferndale voting station. I think it was the Fernwood voting station, the school. And I just went and I said, we cannot just have one management device here, because this is the way that the IEC prevents DA people from voting. So I went to speak to the presiding officer, as you do. And I go there and she's sitting in an office behind a window, and I say, excuse me, may I speak to the presiding officer? The need to get more voter management devices. And I said, no, they told me, no, she's on lunch. I said, there's no lunch on election day, right? There's no lunch on election day. Election day is a specific period of time. And if voters have to stand in the queue for let's say, 7-8 hours, and the wind is blowing or whatever, they're not going to get a chance to vote in the specified time. So I'm afraid on election day, you eat your hot dog while you're dealing with issues. Yeah. No, they weren't. Eventually, I said, I'm not leaving here until I see the presiding officer, and she wasn't coming out. So eventually she came out and I said, we need more voter management devices. I was firm but polite. I don't get rude to people. Then she ordered that I be arrested, and I was arrested on the premises of that school and dragged off by the police. I charged them for wrongful arrest. So I was just doing my job.
You're helping me understand the context of your comment.
Yeah.
But the IEC, like all other SOEs in South Africa, was devastated by state capture. How do we rebuild the IEC so it is more capacitated to be free and fair?
Voters must understand that the way the majority of voters voted resulted in state capture. That is what happened. Now, let me explain why.
South Africans got the party they deserve.
Well, they got the party that the majority voted for, unfortunately. And since 1999, I've had the 5 C's. You might remember I've been talking about them till I'm blue in the face since 1999. Centralization of power, cronyism, otherwise known as cadre deployment, corruption, the criminal captured state. That's what happens, inevitably and in that order. We could see it happening then. We warned about it. We warned about it in every election. And then we saw Jacob Zuma that we knew would be state criminality and state capture on steroids. We warned everybody, stop Zuma. That was the slogan. Oh, Zille's racist and this and that. And they went off and they voted for Jacob Zuma. And everyone says, oh, what are we going to do about state capture?
That came out of that election saying Jacob Zuma was elected president. South Africans got the who they voted for.
Yeah. And now everyone's sitting here crying about state capture. And I say, well, the majority of people voted for it because we told them what was going on.
All right, let's talk about voter turnout and the voters and the Democratic Alliance. If I look at the numbers, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, you peaked at 6 million votes, you went down to 4 million votes, and in the last election, you're now sitting on about 3.5 million votes. Nationally, in terms of voter turnout in the last election, in local government election, we had 48% voter turnout. Are you concerned about voter turnout for your party in this election?
First of all, the DA peaked at about 4.2 million votes, and we've slipped to about 3.56 million votes. Of course, I'm concerned about voter turnout. I mean, this election is going to be the turnout election, and people have to go out and vote and turn out. I mean, you'll notice, and you mentioned it earlier to me, that in the by-election this week, we got 94% of the vote, up from 62%, which is fantastic. It's 30% increase. It very rarely happens. But only 17% of the registered voters bothered to come out.
That's important.
Now, voter turnout is going to be make or break in this election. And if voters sit at home, they are voting for more of the same. I don't want to hear any complaints about corruption or anything else if people don't take the one opportunity they have of changing their government and use it. So then they must get the government.
So if we see ANC voters stay away in mass, if we see ANC and DA voters not come out in mass in this election, it benefits parties like the EFF and MK as well as Action SA.
Well, look, there are only two parties, let me put it this way, there are only two parties that can be the biggest in Joburg. And it matters who is the biggest. Because if you're the biggest party, you've got a much better chance of picking an executive mayor and putting together a coalition. Obviously, it's much better if you don't need a coalition. It's much better if you win outright, because then you can really implement your policy and you can really fix things. That's ideal. But it matters who's the biggest party. And if we can't win outright, which we're going to try to do, if enough people turn out to vote for us, if we can't win outright, we want to be the biggest party by a considerable margin. There are only two that can be the biggest party. One's the DA and the other's the ANC. For every person who votes for a smaller party, they usually take away votes that would have gone to the DA, give it to smaller parties, and enable the ANC then to emerge as the biggest party. And then what all those smaller parties do, as we've seen with Rise and Mzansi and this and that and the other, they hustle around the ANC, get positions, and then they're happy. And the corruption, the syndicated corruption continues. Now, people must make up their mind in this election. They must understand how the voting system works. You have 2 votes when you vote at municipal level. One for a ward councillor, which is very important, and the other is for the list councillor. And you are voting to get a list and a ward. And the proportion of all the votes for the DA get added up from all the voting stations, and the proportion of those votes vis-a-vis the total vote in the city is the percentage of seats we will get in the council. So every vote counts. Every single vote counts. And people must get that, and they must get off their backsides and vote.
Do we need only 2 big parties, regardless of who they are?
No, we don't only need 2 big parties. I don't think that that's right. And a proportional system never results in 2 big parties. Only 2 big parties? I mean, there are 2 dominant parties, yes, the DA and the ANC. But proportional systems throw up smaller parties. What we need is thresholds to prevent parties like the 0.4% party of Al-Jamaa from getting 2 mayors in it.
So do you think the biggest party with the biggest percentage of votes should be mayor?
Well,
that's your red line.
No, it's not a red line. You can never make a red line in coalition systems, because it's the first party who can get a coalition together that takes you over 50% of the city council. So you've got to get 50% of the city council plus 1. That will be 136 council seats. That's what we need to pick a mayor, to pass a budget, and to do a whole range of other things, to do property transactions, a whole range of other things. Appoint senior officials. That's what we need, 136 seats. So we need to get 50% plus 1 of the vote to get 136 seats in council out of the 270. Every vote counts. But in the case that you have to set up a coalition, if you're the biggest party, you've got a better chance of getting to that over 50% with other smaller parties that are more or less compatible with your value set, but definitely not with the EFF.
So Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, IFP, ANC remain on the table?
Well, I'm not going to say till after the election, but every vote that goes to those parties is a vote less for the DA, is a vote that could have gone to the DA to make us stronger.
Right. As you ask Joburg residents to make up their minds on their vote, as we sit here today, Cape Town Mayor Johannesburg Helen Zille and the DA's Gauteng leader Solly Mzimanga have both announced that they will contest or are available to contest to be the next DA leader. Would you like to weigh in on if you've made up your mind and who you endorse it?
Well, I don't know who's standing yet, and I won't endorse anybody. From my position, it would be completely wrong to endorse someone. As a Secretary General of the party, I can't do that. But I know all the candidates, and I don't even know all who will submit their nominations. This proves that the DA is a democratic organization. Anybody in the DA can stand for any of these positions. And it's good to have a contest on our hands. Very good to have a contest on our hands. And people are putting up their hands, and I'm saying, great, it's wonderful.
Just so you know, Johannesburg Helen Zille is a prodigy of Helen Zille.
Let me tell you. Sorry about this. The resident frog. Jordan Hill Lewis is a product of Jordan Hill Lewis. I and many other people spotted his talent since he was a schoolboy volunteering for the DA. The first place I met him was in Bishop Lavis at a by-election. He was absolutely committed to our values from the start. He applied for the Young Leaders Program, he got in on merit, and he worked his way up the ranks. That is what an open opportunity society does. It creates the opportunity. You have to take the opportunity. You have to use the opportunity. You have to use it very well, and the next door will open for you. That's what happened to Jordan Hill Lewis, to Solly Msimanga, and to many other people. And Jordan Hill Lewis is not where he is because of me, by any stretch of the imagination. He is where he is because of himself.
As a DA veteran, does the leader of the party need to be, from your perspective, within cabinet, within the GNU, or can he be outside and remain in another post in government?
Under normal circumstances, the leader would be in the cabinet and hopefully be the president. But these aren't normal circumstances. We're a junior partner in a coalition government. Because why? The voters only gave us 22% of the vote, and they gave the ANC 40% of the vote. So they got the government they voted for. And then, as a favour, President Ramaphosa brought in a whole lot of these smaller parties who've got no leverage at all, because if he kicks them out, they've got no bargaining power or leverage at all. They can't bring the government down. But we are the effective opposition that has to be part of government for reasons that we all understand. But this is an unusual coalition because we have to be in opposition and in government at the same time. And it's very easy when you are in public office, let's say in a cabinet position, to get sucked in to the narrative of the government that you're part of. We need to keep our opposition voice very loud on key issues. And that's why in these circumstances, if the choice was mine, I would stay outside.
Okay.
But the choice isn't mine, and I'm not going to influence the choice.
All right. That's informative. Finally, you are the outgoing Federal Council Chair. Do you think the DA's Federal Council Chair needs to be a full-time position, or can they be in cabinet?
Look, it is a full-time position. But what I've done is placed a lot of emphasis on getting the systems and processes in place. And now the blue machine is running. It is running because we've got very great depth of capacity, depth of leadership, and it runs. Like my campaign runs. There's a system in place. And now I can be doing this job and have the Federal Council Chair position run relatively smoothly. And with me, I always say, with my finger on the steering wheel. Because the car is running.
Analogy, yeah.
Car is running smoothly, I put my finger on the steering wheel. Now, it depends on how many changes the new chair of Federal Council would like to bring in and their style of leadership. Contrary to popular expectation, I'm very good at delegating.
I'm not sure I believe you, Yalwa.
You don't have to believe me, but I know it's a fact. So, I am not sure, unless the person has tremendous capacity, that they would be able to be in cabinet and run the DA at the same time. But in our constitution, it says it is largely a full-time job.
All right, that's where we leave things for today. As I promised with all my interviews, it's not a gotcha interview. I don't need to sound cleverer than the person I'm interviewing, but I didn't promise that that person would not be made to sweat just a little bit. If you feel left out, get in contact with anyone on the political team at Business Day, the Financial Mail, the Sunday Times, the Sowetan, as well as the Daily Dispatch and the Herald, and we'll be sure to make time for a sit down with you. My name is Hajra Marji for Business Day.